Hello everyone, welcome back to the Class 47 Peter YouTube channel, and in today's video I'm going to be making a start on the scenery, on the landscaping. So before I get started into this video, I just want to say a big thank you to those who posted a comment in part 3 of the tunnel rebuild, which saw me doing the landscaping of the tunnel. I do very much appreciate the feedback, and I hope you enjoy this video, which is going to be focusing on the scenery, which for this video we're going to be adding the scenery on what we did in part 3, on the landscaping. That's the bank and also the ditch. Now before I do go into today's video, there were a couple of little things that I have done since part 3. First of all, along that end of the tunnel just there was a gap there. That's now been filled in. I used several pieces of plaster cloth to fill that in, and then I've put some static grass on top of that and some foliage, and so that's now filled in that gap, and that looks now a lot better, and that blends in with the scenery. Also, I have made a slight change to the ditch. It's still looking as it is, as you saw it in part 3, but I found that the banks of the ditch, they were too square. To be honest, it didn't cross my mind during the filming or even the editing of the video, but it was only after watching the video and then coming back into the shed, and the more I looked at it, I just thought to myself, I don't really like that, that can be changed. Because it doesn't look very realistic or very natural looking. Because if you see ditches or even rivers in real life, the banks are not square. They are, if you like, sloped. So I just took some plaster cloth sheets and I shaped it into what I think is now a much more natural look. It's now sloped and I'm much happier with it now. In some areas of the ditch as well, it's narrower than it is with other areas. But the first thing I have to do, before I even make a start on the scenery, I'm going to add a stone wall and fencing along here. So for the stone walls I'm going to be using these, which these are made from plaster, which you can acquire cheap off eBay. I know they're not the most amazing looking ones in the world, but they still do the job. And once this area's has all been sceneried up, when you look at it from a distance especially, they do look really impressive and really good. So the stone walls have now gone into place. They might not be the most amazing in the world, but they are still rather good, especially on areas when you've started putting scenery on them and you stand several feet away. They do look really good. As for the fencing in that back garden there, I've used the scale model scenery wooden fencing. It's the same stuff I've used for one of the station platforms, which is one of the bay platforms specifically, which I've used this on. I know it doesn't look anything like the fencing that's already in the garden, which is also a scale model scenery kit, but I didn't want to go out and buy another pack of that fencing just to do that little area there. I just didn't think it was worth doing. But you know, that wooden fencing that I've added there, that still looks rather good there, I think, and it has added a little bit more variety and interest, I think, to the area. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the culverts, which I have here, the scale model scenery culvert kit. Now I'm not going to be building this on camera, so I'm going to build this off camera. And as I said in part 3, there's going to be 2 culverts running along where the ditch is. So there's going to be one there, and there's going to be one down there. So I've built both of the culverts that are going to be going onto the ditch. And I'm rather pleased with these. They're not too difficult to do. They are quite fun to do. And I really did enjoy putting these together. I think the second one I built did come out slightly better than the first in some ways. But I am still happy with both of them though. And I especially do love the brick paper on these. Especially when you stood a few feet away from them. You know, that does look quite impressive. I've even painted the pipes as well. So I'm going to get these added to the layout. Okie doke, so both of the culverts are now in place. Now the one that you can see in front of you, in order to fit that in, I've had to modify the bank. More specifically this part around here, which you've seen me do on camera. And the reason for that is so it can fit correctly in there. It wasn't quite the right height for a start because it was a bit bigger than the actual culvert itself, so there was a gap just at the top of the culvert, but also it wasn't quite shaped correctly for it to fit, because otherwise, had I fit the culvert in, it would have been over here. Basically the pipe would not have lined up with the ditch, and that's what I saw whilst trying to fit it in, and I just didn't like it. It just did not look right. I could have put it on an angle, but even so I just didn't think it looked right. I wanted that pipe to line up with the ditch, and I wanted it to fit correctly. So I have had to make a modification to it, but it's not been a biggie. It's just been bits of the Woodland Scenic Shaper sheet, then some of the plaster cloth, just little bits cut out, and then obviously painting it with the Daleroni burnt umber mixed with some white to tone it down. I may have to do more than one coat on this little bit round here, because all this that you see in front of you took several coats for it to look right, stop a large amount of little white bits showing through the paint. But we'll just see how that goes. But I'm happy with how this is looking now. Right, so with the culverts now in place and some touching ups that have been made on there, it only needed another coat. As you can see, that's now nicely dried. No white patches anywhere. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put some soil just along where the ditch is on the banks. And I'm going to be using Woodland Scenic's soil, which I have in this resealable bag. And that's just so, should any patches where there's no grass be shown, it will look better with the soil on than just plain areas that have just been painted. Okay, so I've added all the woodland scenic soil along the ditch. I have also hoovered up the excess, which I did off camera, and I'm rather pleased with how that's looking. But what we need to do now is to let the glue dry before we do anything else. I've also added some of that soil on the front of the culverts, and that's just to bring out the detail, and that will especially look good when all the water's gone in there. So rather pleased with how this is looking now. And also in a couple of places on the edges of the pool I have added a couple of carrier bags, and it's little things like that that really do make a big difference. So off camera, on top of the soil, I've added some of this, which is a treated PVA glue. It's just PVA mixed with a bit of fairy liquid and then water. That's been applied on top of the soil, so then that will dry nicely. So while that dries, I'm now going to move on to adding the static grass along the bank. Now, I'm not going to use the static grass that I've already got because I want to use something different, because then it adds more variety and interest on the layout rather than just using the same scatter. And I've already used a variety of different ones on the layout already. Maybe in perhaps 1 or 2 areas I've used the same one. But what I'm going to use along the bank is static grass made by a manufacturer that I've not used before. And so the scatter I'm using is made by WWS Scenics, and this is the muddy grass, and this is the 6mm long stuff in a 100g bag. And then to add the static grass, I'm going to use my homemade static grass applicator, which is a tea strainer and a fly swat. You can buy static grass applicators off the shelves, but they don't come cheap. They cost just over 80 quid, around 90 quid, or even over 100 quid. So why spend that much money on something I'm going to use very little of, when I can go and make something like this that can still give us good enough results, that are just as good, and making something like this has cost me nothing really, because I already had the stuff to hand. So most of the static grass has been laid, and I'm rather pleased with how this has come out. And I think the results that I've achieved using that homemade static grass applicator are just as good as the results that you'd get than going out and buying one off the shelves. As for applying the static grass, it's far from finished. The banks, as you can see along the ditch, they've been left plain so far, and that's because I am still going to be applying some of the muddy grass on them, but not so much, so you can get patches of the soil showing through, which is what I'm after. Also off camera I have hoovered up some of the excess as well. Putting the static grass on that bit though there was not easy. So I have had to do that the best I can. In some places there's larger clumps of it than there is in others, but I quite like that effect. And so I'm rather pleased with what I've done here. So next I'm going to be adding some onto the banks of where the ditch is. So I've added the static grass all along the ditch, and like I say, I haven't gone too crazy with the static grass. I haven't completely covered the sides with the static grass, because the way I've done it is I've applied it so that you can still see the soil in some places, in particularly along the edges of the ditch, as you can see, which I think makes it look very realistic. And also it does add a bit of more interest and realism, and all the excess that went into the ditch, that's all been hoovered up. And as for the static grass itself, made by World War Scenics, it really is a fantastic product. But because it does come in balls though, when using it on the static grass applicator, some of it did have to be applied on by hand, because some of these bits of static grass formed into balls, as you can see here, were being a bit stubborn, so I had to break them up by hand. But it still created a very good effect. And so I'm rather happy with how this now looks. And in certain areas as well, along the ditch, some areas have more grass on it than in other areas. So now I'm going to turn my attention to this area here, where the pool is. So what I'm going to be doing is, in the pool, I'm going to be adding one of these, which is 3D printed shopping trolleys, and I shall be adding one of these. I bought these off eBay for a couple of quid. I will put the link to those in the description. And here's one that I've painted up, which is something I did off camera, as you can see, and that shall be going in the pool. And that's going to be lying on its side. It's not going to go smack bang in the middle there, but that's just to show you an idea of where it's going to be going. So it looks like it's being tucked in there, basically. Something else I'm also going to be adding are these, which have just arrived in the post, and these are bulrushes made by Tasma Products, and they do make some cracking products, and you do see these in a pool or even round by a lake even. And I think that these to go in the pool would be quite nice, and if there's some left, I could possibly add some maybe along the ditch in a few areas perhaps. And looking at them, they do look really nice, and so they'll add some cracking detail. I'm also going to be adding these two guys, which I've just painted up. These are just cheap Chinese figures that I've painted up, and there is a reason why these are going to be going in this area here, which will become clear later on. Right, so the details that I wanted to add to the pool have been added, and I am really pleased with the results, how this has turned out. The bulrushes in particular, all of them have been used on the pool, so I haven't got any left, so that's kind of thrown the idea of adding some along the ditch out the window, although I could still go out and buy some more of them. So that idea is still up in the air. And what I've done is with these, I haven't tried to put them all in one area. I have tried to spread them out a bit, put them in a few different places, but up this area here, in this corner, I have tried to clump them together, as you can see. And so these bulrushes, they certainly have added a lot of detail to this area. I've also added a tyre down there, as you can see. At the back here, I've also added a newspaper, a scale model scenery one. I know that there is a bit of a gap between the bulrushes and the end of the pool here, but to be honest with you, I don't think that really matters too much. And I have added that newspaper there anyway, just behind those, just to try and give a bit more definition and to try and add some little detail behind those. I've also added a newspaper up that end as well. The shopping trolley I've also added in place. I know that there isn't a supermarket anywhere on my layout, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't have a shopping trolley that's been dumped somewhere on the layout. Because don't forget, people chuck them in cuts in the canal. And how many canals do you see that you see near supermarkets? So you can have them that have been dumped some miles away from where the supermarket is. And I've added it on its side, so it looks like it's been thrown in there. And just behind the shopping trolley, I've added a couple of bulrushes. That makes some really nice detail. And then just alongside the edge of the pool on the bank, I've added those two guys that you saw earlier, and they are carrying a washing machine, and they are going to throw the washing machine into the pool. And I thought that would make a very nice and interesting bit of detail to have. That's a particular scene I had in mind that I wanted to do, and I've done it. The washing machine, I can't remember who manufactured that, but it did come off eBay in a pack with several others that I have used on the layout already, which you may have or may not have seen. I will have a look around, and if I do come across them I will put them in the description. The figures, as I said earlier, they're just the Chinese ones, which I did have to modify. I had to cut off the arms and then position them so they were lowered, so it actually looked like that they'd be carrying the washing machine. And of course they were painted up by me. And the idea is that they've obviously trespassed. They've either climbed over either that wall there or that wall there, which I have extended because there was a gap there before which I didn't like. So to make that look a lot more realistic looking, I've added another section in there. So they've either climbed over those walls to get to the side of the pool here to dump that washing machine into. Right, so now I'm going to turn my attention to the main area of the landscaping, the bank. And I'm going to be adding some flower pollen to represent flowers. And I'm going to be using a bag of Woodland Scenics flower pollen, and this is the yellow stuff, which I thought would look quite nice. I'm not going to put this everywhere on the bank, I'm only just going to add it in a few places, and that will really help to bring out the detail and bring this area to life. So I finished putting on the flower pollen scatter, and I've placed it in a few various different areas along the bank, and it's just been my treated PVA glue just dropped on, and I just made a few small patches of the flowers in a few areas. And so I for one am quite happy with how this looks, especially when you're standing where I am. You know, I certainly do think that looks nice. Quick update, I bought some more of the Tasman Products bulrushes, and I've added them in various places along the ditch. And so that is now looking very realistic now. I am rather happy with that. And it really is amazing just what a difference little details like this can make. What I've also done is I've used some of the bulrushes from that second pack to add to this end of the pool. Some of them have been used to fill in a few gaps which were around here, and so I've used some of those to fill in those gaps, and so I think that now they look a lot more natural now than they were before, because there wouldn't really be gaps between them, they'd all be growing close together. So that's what I've replicated here. I have, however, kept a slight gap in between those there, and that's just so that you can actually see the edge of the pool on that bank just there. And also the gap that was down here along the side of these bulrushes, I filled that in with a few more bulrushes because I decided in the end that that gap needed filling because I didn't like it in the end. I've also added another bulrush just on the side of the pool there, and I think that looks fantastic. So what I'm going to do now in a few areas along the ditch, mainly by where the walls are, I'm going to add a couple of bushes and perhaps a bit of foliage in a few areas, and that will really help to bring out the detail and bring this area to life. I've also added a few primroses as well in a couple of areas, and they are Tasma Products ones which I have used in some of the gardens, and I had a couple left, and so I thought I'd use them here. And why not? Because again, you know, it's adding little things like this that really do help to bring it all to life, and I think they look quite nice there where they are as well. And in a couple of areas along the banks of the ditch, I've added some scale model scenery newspapers and some Cheeky Tech drink cans. Now I haven't gone too OTT with this because that's not what I really wanted. I just wanted to add a few of these in a few areas. I've also added a carrier bag there, a Tesco one, and I've just done this just to add more detail and more depth, really. But I didn't want to add it everywhere because, like I said, that's not what I was aiming for, because at the end of the day it's not a rubbish tip, and I didn't want to make it too untidy, like in every single corner that there's rubbish. I just wanted to add it in a few areas to help bring the detail, and especially when you're stood where I am right now, you know, adding those little bits of detail really do highlight it. Okay, so it's been about a week or so since I last did anything on the scenery of this landscaping. That was because of, due to the hot weather we've been having, and also I didn't want to keep going at this constantly, otherwise I'd just lose interest. But whilst I've been taking a break from this, I have been coming up with other ideas for things that I can add to this scene that will really help to bring it to life. So one of the things I'm going to be adding to the scene are these. We've got some thistle tufts made by Rival Crafts. Never heard of them before. I only heard about them when I saw someone in one of the Facebook groups I'm in mention this manufacturer. And so I thought I'd check out their website, and they do a wide variety of stuff. I will put the link to their website below in the description so you can go and have a look. So what I've done, I've added some of the thistle tufts just along the edges of the ditch, as you can see. And I haven't done a massive long row of them going all the way down one side. I've spreaded them out in different areas. And I haven't put them everywhere either, I've only put them in certain areas. Which I think makes it look more natural, I think. I've also added a couple just down along here. There's one there, and another one there. And I've also added a couple in a few areas along this side of the ditch as well, along the bank. So yeah, I mean, these are fantastic little products, these, and I have still got some left, but these can still be reused because I can still use them in other areas on the layout, which is something that I do plan to do with these. So I think that's something for another day. So now I'm going to turn my attention to adding some trees, which this scene won't be complete without any trees at all. Because without the trees I think that this will look a bit bland, to be honest. But I'm not going to be adding trees here and there and everywhere. I'm only going to be adding a couple in a couple of areas, because I think that that will really help to bring this scene to life. And also I don't want to add trees everywhere on this landscaping, because there's other detail that I want to be adding. Now for trees you can get something cheaper, such as this, which is made by Gauge Master, and for a start, you know, it's alright, it's good for what it is if you're starting out in the hobby. But if you want something a lot more realistic looking, then it goes without saying that these are not as good. Now when it comes to realistic trees, you can make them yourself. You can make them out of wire, or you can make them out of seafoam, but you've got to have the skills to do it. You can buy them off the market, but this is where it goes down the road of expense, because realistic trees can be expensive. And over here I've got 3 of them, which this is about the amount that I want to be adding to the scene. And these didn't come cheap, I will admit, for the 3, but at the end of the day, if you want something realistic like this, then you've got to be willing to spend the money on these things. You know, that's the way with the hobby. And these came from a website called Model Scenery Supplies. I will put a link to the site in the description below. So the trees we have, we've got an oak tree made by MP Scenery Products. We've also got a spreading sycamore tree made by Footpath Realistic Model Scenery, and we've also got another oak tree in this bag here, also made by Footpath. So the trees have now been added to the landscape, and I'm really rather happy with these trees and where I've put them and where they've been placed. And it just goes to show the life and the realism that even adding a few trees like this can make to a scene like this. They weren't easy to fit in, I will be honest, because what I had to do was I had to use a kitchen knife to make a hole in the landscaping to slot these trees into place, but they just wouldn't stand up on their own. So what I had to do was, with those 2 there, I used some black tack and some Yoo-hoo glue to hold them in place firmly. With that one there, I had to trim the bottom slightly to fit it into place, but they have gone in very nicely otherwise. And what I've also done is, because some of the leaves on the branches were loose in the bag, what I've done is, instead of going to the trouble of gluing them back on again, I have actually sprinkled them along the bottom of the trees, so that way it looks like that the leaves have dropped off and they're on the floor, as you see in real life. And again, it's little things like that that make a big difference, that just add massive more of detail to a little scene like this. And no matter where you look at them, they just look superb. The sycamore tree down the bottom has got a little bit of a lean on it. There wasn't really much I could do about that because that's a bit stubborn. No matter how much I tried to get it up nice and straight, it still leaned over slightly. But to be honest with you, I think that probably adds to more realism, because if you look at trees in real life, they're not all sat up perfectly straight. Some of them do have a lean on them. Earlier this week I took a trip to Hobby Rail and bought a couple of things to use for the scenery on the landscaping. So we have some Woodland Scenics bushes. These are the Forest Blend ones, and I bought these ones because there's a mix of different colours in this one, so I thought that these would look fantastic on the scenery, especially because if you look at bushes in real life, they're not all just one colour. So I thought those would look quite nice. I also have some Woodland Scenics clump foliage in dark green, which I thought to have this in a few areas, this will look quite nice. And then one other thing, this has nothing to do with the scenery, but this is just something I wanted, is this. It's an Oxford Rail 5 plank wagon in the Coppice Cannock Collieries livery. Okay, so I've added some of the bushes and foliage around in a few areas, and I'm really happy with how this is now looking. And the bushes in particular have certainly helped to add the depth to this scene. I've added some foliage along there as well on the front where the ditch is, only in a couple of areas. And what I've also done here with this one in particular, I've added a mix of the bushes and foliage there just to add some variety and interest. And because of the ones I bought with the different colours in them, I think that certainly added more variety and again interest to this area. It's just the trees in the way that are obscuring some of it now. So really happy with how this is looking. Those little bits there round by that culvert, originally I wasn't planning to add them there, but I just added them at the last minute just to add a little bit more interest there and detail. So there's just, I would say at least maybe one or two things to add to this scene before I can call it about, I'd say, 90% done, because then we can make a start on adding the water into the ditch and the pool. Quick update viewers, what I've done is just there I've added a bit of a mix of bushes and foliage there. The reason I've done that is just to add some more detail and variety and a little bit more colour, so that now looks quite interesting. So what I'm also going to be doing is I'm going to be adding some more flowers to this scene. I've been and bought some white flower pollen scatter, just like what I did with the yellow flowers, as you can see in the places which you saw me do earlier. And so I thought adding some white flowers around here, you know, again that will really help bring out more detail and colour. So really pleased with how this is starting to come out now. Okay, so today in the post I got this from Model Scenery Supplies, which is a little bag of white flower flock, which I'm going to be using in certain areas along here. And I think these white flowers will help to finish this area off quite nicely. So what I've done is I've used my treated PVA glue in this bottle, and I've just dropped the glue into this area along here, which is one of the areas I want to be adding the flowers. You can use a spray adhesive as well for this, but I find that using the dropper bottle with that treated PVA glue still works just as good. And so then all I'm going to do is by hand sprinkle an amount of the white flower scatter onto the area where I've put the glue on. Just like that. Right, so off camera, in a few areas, I've added some of the white flower scatter pollen. Now again, like with the yellow flowers, I haven't added them here and there and everywhere. I've just added them in a few areas. And that really has brought this scene to life. And I'm just so happy with the result. And it means that the stuff I've got left can go elsewhere in the layout. So I'm really happy with how this scene looks now. I'm going to call it 90% done. So all I've got to do really now is to get around to adding the water into the ditch and the pool. The bank itself along here is all done. There's no more other bits of detail that I can add to this area. I'm happy with it. I can call it done. There's nothing else I plan to add to the area. I don't plan to add any people or wildlife here because I've added that in other areas on the layout. I don't think it needs to go on the bank myself. But I'm really happy with this now. And also just a quick piece on the oak tree. With this particular tree, originally in the video I stated that I used black tack and Yoo-hoo glue to hold the trees up. Now for this particular one it didn't really work because it kept leaning over quite noticeably to the point where it leaned right over to there, where it literally looked like it had fallen over, like a storm had come along and just completely blew it over, and I didn't really want that. I don't mind that tree being on a little bit of a lean because you do see that in real life, but this particular tree in the middle I wanted it to stand upright. So what I had to do was I pulled the tree out of the hole. I removed the black tack because I don't think it was very suitable to use to hold it up, and I filled the hole with blue tack, which I think is much stronger than the black tack. The hole itself was filled right to the top using super glue, and then I just simply pushed the tree back into the hole and it's now stayed upright, and it has been left overnight and pretty much most of the day, and it's still staying upright, which is exactly where I want it to be, so I'm a happy man now. And also I managed to remove the tree without distorting or damaging any of the static grass or the leaves around the bottom of the tree. So I'm almost ready to add the water into the ditch and the pool, but before I do that there's one or two things that I want to add to the pool first, and I want to add a bit of wildlife. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of swans, which I have just here. Now these are made by Fine Scale Figures. They come in a pack of 5, and I bought a pack and I've painted these 2 up, and they're going to go in the pool, and I think they'll go really well in that scene. And I have hand painted them myself. Those little details such as the black around by the eyes and on the beaks, they were done using a pen. The beaks were done by hand using a very small detail paintbrush, and I used a larger brush to paint the bodies and the necks. So what I'm doing, I'm going to glue them in place. So all I need to do with these really is just add a small amount of glue underneath the swan to glue them in place. They do have feet, but these particular ones lost their feet when I was removing them from the sprue that they come on. So I'm going to add one swan there. And the other one can go next to it. Like so. So there we are. So now we come on to adding the water. So I'm going to be using Woodland Scenic's realistic water. This is something I've had for ages now. It's not something I've just been out and bought. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to make the water murky to make it look realistic. So I'm going to be using this Woodland Scenic's water tint, and this is the murky one. So what I'm going to do is, as you can see, the bottle needs to be shook up because it's been left standing for a while. So I'm going to give it a good shake. So that's now being shook up. And so to mix the water, I'm going to use this plastic jug. I know that there's a crack in here, but it should still be fine to mix the amount of water that I need to mix. So I just open up the realistic water. I haven't used this stuff for a while. The last time I used this stuff was for that little fountain I made, which was one of the Metcalf kit ones. So about that much we need. This is to be used for the pool. In fact, I'll put a bit more in actually. So put that to one side. Now, to use the water tint, what we've got to do first of all is we need to check for consistency, because this is something I've had since I first started buying stuff for the landscaping. Okay, so that looks good. So consistency looks right to me. So that bit of tissue can be thrown away in the bin, because we don't really need that now. So now what I've got to do is I've got to put a few drops of this into the realistic water. And then I'm going to use this old paintbrush and I'm going to mix it up and give it a good stir. And then make sure as well when mixing this up to get it all off the bottom and go around the sides. Okay, so the realistic water and the water tint has been mixed up enough now, and I have added a couple more extra drops in here, and so I'm rather pleased with how that's looking. So now I've got to pour it into the pool, and then we'll do the ditch afterwards. And so a couple of days later we have the finished result. All the water is now in the pool and the ditch. I was going to put a video clip of me pouring the water into the pool, but my arm was obscuring that because of the angle where I put the camera, so you couldn't really see me do it anyway, so I abandoned that. But instead what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk you through what I did and what happened, because it has taken a couple of days to get it to as it looks now. The reason for this was because when I poured the water into the pool, it all started running down into the ditch. That's because this is not actually flat, it is uneven, hence why the water was running back down. And it was basically leaving a large empty patch in the pool, which is not what I wanted, because I wanted the whole pool to be filled with water. So what I had to do was I had to gradually build it up, if you like. And it's not helped by the fact that the stuff, to begin with, it took nearly a full day for it to dry. And so what I had to do was I had to gradually fill it up bit by bit to get it to as it looks now. So it's now finished. I am very pleased with the end result. It's certainly been rewarding, all that hard work. I also had to make a few touch-ups here and there with a paintbrush, because there were a few air bubbles in places, so to cover them up I just used a detail brush, dipped it into the water, which I have still got some left by the way, in this plastic jug, and I just simply brushed it on in place. And I'm more than happy with how this now looks, and as I said earlier, this water has been made to look murky. I made it look so murky that you can't see underneath the pool, which is exactly what I wanted to achieve, because you do see that in real life. You do see murky water, especially because in some cases you can't see underneath anyway, and I didn't want the bottom of the pool, or even the ditch for that matter, to be exposed. And also, if you look at certain little areas, such as this shopping trolley here on its side by the bulrushes, it actually looks like it's in the water, not like I've just gone around it with the realistic water. Even when you look at the swans as well, you know, it's amazing just how much realism and life adding water can bring to a scene, especially when it comes to adding the little details such as swans, or even smaller details such as plant life, etc. So that's the pool. So now I'm going to take you through the ditch. Now, when the water ran down into it from the pool, it was nearly up to the brim, but when it was drying off, it got shrunk down. So that was certainly satisfying to see, and it certainly looks now how I wanted it to. In the case of that culvert, however, much of the water ran into there, and also you couldn't even see the bottom of the pipe on it. It was nearly filled, nearly almost up to the top, about nearly halfway up to the pipe. So when it was drying off, I had to literally, and I know this is going to sound slightly unorthodox, but I had to use a very small metal spoon that I have to spoon it out, and then use the rest of it to simply sort of add a little bit more back into it, so you can actually see it as it looks now, because I just felt it looked silly, to be honest, with how high the water level was on this culvert. And also in certain areas on the ditch the water level is lower, which is what you do get in real life, and in order to achieve that I had to use a paintbrush and then brush some in to the ditch, you know, to do it by layers basically. And not only once you've added the water in, but even when you start adding little details like the bulrushes, or even if it's things like thistles, static grass on the banks, or even bits of litter, as you can see, it really does bring a scene to life. You know, you'll be amazed at what a big difference it can do, and how realistic that it looks afterwards. And it's especially the case if you're from this distance and you're looking down at either the pool or even at the ditch. Especially when you see, for example, the ditch there, while you're admiring all the detail that you put into this scene. You know, when you can see the water in the ditch and all the detail that's there, you know, it's just fantastic. And you've got that culvert there, which doesn't have much water in it. I did put some of the realistic water in there, and when it dried off, it's dried so that you can still see the bed, which is the soil there, and possibly even you might be able to see the scatter that I put there as well, which has made a very good effect, I think, in my opinion. So that's it then. The scenery on the landscaping has now been complete, and it is something I've been working on for over a month now, and to have it now all finished, it's just rewarding. And I would also like to take this time to thank those who did give me some positive comments on the work that I've done, because prior to this video being uploaded, I did put some pictures on social media showing the work I've done on the scenery, and I did have quite a lot of positive comments. So it really is nice to get some praise from others after all the hard work that you put into this. And my heart is singing because I've achieved what I set out to and wanted to achieve with the scenery, and I'm just over the moon with how it now looks. There's no areas that I regret doing or would like to change and go back to. I'm happy with as it stands now, how it looks. So now I've got to move on to do the rest of the scenery on the tunnel, up on all this area here. That's going to be coming, of course, in future videos. I haven't decided yet though if it's going to be in one video or more. I think it's possible that it might be more than one video, but we'll have to see what happens. I have got the ideas for the remaining of the scenery up here in my head, but I'm not going to say anything because I want you guys to be watching the videos when they come out. So that's something to be looking out for in the future. So all that's left for me to say now is thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If you haven't yet checked out the other videos that I've done on the rebuild of this tunnel, then you can find them on my YouTube channel. Also, if you want to, please do feel free to leave a comment. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you like what you see, and also, while you're at it, smash that like button, and also check out all the other videos that I have on the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.